Hello, my name is Danielle Duvall. I'm the head gardener at Erchless Estate in Oakville, and I'm here at the Oakville Conservatory with Halton Food. They've asked me to share some vegetable and historical knowledge of the land, and I'm very excited to do that today. So let's get started. Erchless Estates is located at 8 Navy Street in southeast Oakville on the lakefront. The land at Erchless Estates has been the site of human activity for thousands of years. This land is steeped in First Nations history and is located on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. In 1827, William Chisholm purchased 960 acres of crown land at auctions, which included both sides of the 16-mile creek. From that point, 6 generations of William's descendants lived on the property from 1835 until the 1960s when the property was sold. The town of Oakville purchased it in 1977, and Erchless has served as a community museum since the 1980s. It has been operated by the town of Oakville since 1991 when it was turned into parkland and the Oakville Museum to cultivate the local area's history. The garden beds along the pathway were installed around 1899 by Allen Chisholm. Allen had the coach house built around the same time, and this included a gardener's residence. So we know that at that point, there was definitely activity and maintenance of the grounds and the gardens. I am told that around those early days, there were large flower beds that are still in existence today along the path, and they are filled with things like cannas, castor beans, and salvia. The paths are still in the park today. Visitors to the park are allowed to walk them. They are considered a carriage path because Allen Chisholm would ride his horses and carriage through the paths of his estate. After Allen's death in 1918, Allen's cousin's widow, Imelda Chisholm, who lived across the street at what is present-day Lakeside Park, purchased the Erchless Estate to keep it in the Chisholm family. Imelda was the widow of Alexander Chisholm, who found fortune after inventing a bean splitting machine. He and his brother Charles Petit Chisholm had earlier started a soup factory by processing vegetables in town. Mrs. Imelda Chisholm used Erchless as a summer home with her daughters Juliet and Hazel. Juliet and Hazel had lived on the estate as well in those little cottages that today are being used by the Oakville Historical Society. In 1924, Imelda had the rock garden commissioned by famous landscape architects Howard and Laurie Dunnington Grubb. This power couple founded Sheridan Nurseries in 1913. The original plants used in the 1924 installation were grown right here in Oakville. It is quite beautiful. Oakville has a long history of producing strawberries. The soil and growing conditions here were perfect for strawberries and other soft fruits. At one time, Oakville was considered the strawberry producer for all of Canada. We shipped tons of strawberries by boat and by train all over the nation. Local farmer John Cross, as in Cross Avenue, was a big grower of strawberries and strawberry production. With the help of John Chisholm, they started making baskets in their own sheds to hold the strawberries for shipping, which ended up being a huge industry and business for the town of Oakville. Another interesting fact, because strawberries were such a huge part of this town's economy, it was customary to have strawberry socials back around the 1800s. These were events that took place between June and July during harvest. They were organized usually by the Women's Auxiliary of the churches, and they were a pretty big deal. Throughout that whole month, people would gather on Navy Street, close to where the lawn bowling club is now, and they would celebrate the strawberry and the strawberry harvest. They would have strawberries for sale and strawberry everything, and the people would just celebrate the fruit and all of its prosperity. James Wesley Hill, who was also a very popular strawberry farmer in Oakville at the time, he was an escaped slave from Maryland who crossed the Potomac River into Pennsylvania and then made his way across the border hidden in a packing box. With his first earnings from employment in Canada, he sent his first earnings back to his former owner as payment on his purchase price. Hill first stayed with his friend Warren Wallace in Bronte. He became employed in Oakville by John Alton in about 1850s to remove stumps and clear underbrush from a cleared wood lot. Hill rented a house by Alton and later rented a 100-acre Samuel Harris farm on 9th Line. He built a house which still stands today at 457 Maple Grove Drive. James Wesley Hill participated in the successful fruit growing industry in Oakville. His strawberry farm helped make Oakville the one-time strawberry industry capital of Canada. Back in the 1860s, we had two famous varieties of strawberries that were being grown and shipped around the nation. These included Wilson's Albany and Triomphe de Grande. You could buy 1,000 runners for $4 back then if you were so inclined to start your own strawberry farm. I chose edibles for the Erchless Rock Garden. It was a series of questions I asked myself while gardening there for a few years. Questions like, what was the space before the Chisholm family? Who was here before then? I started researching indigenous peoples and how did they eat food to sustain themselves? How were they using the land? How was the land feeding them? Which brought me to I learned about the Three Sisters plantings that they did, which included corn, beans, and squash. And these three major vegetables were sacred to those people. They were planted together, usually in a mound. The corn would be planted to support the beans. So the corn typically would rise from the earth first, and then the beans would grow. They would sort of spiral out and latch onto the corn that was hard and rigid. And so as the corn ascended up into the sky, the beans would use that for support. And while the beans were growing on the corn, underneath the ground, the beans would add nitrogen to the soil, which corn uses a lot of. So it would help the corn, replenish the nutrients in the soil. And then the squash around the outside would help, not only is it producing another wonderful vegetable that is really high in nutrients to be consumed, but also it would shade the ground for any weeds, but also it would deter raccoons and other small animals from stepping into the Three Sisters planting and eating the beans and corn because they didn't like the feeling on their paws. So it was an ingenious way of farming or growing vegetables, and they kind of were the first companion plants. I started thinking, okay, well, the Chisholms were here 200 years ago. What were they doing? How were they feeding themselves? Was there livestock? What were the trends of the 1920s? And I don't think there was supermarkets or fast food chains or even food delivery service. So again, I dove into the research and utilized the Google, and there I found a lot of interesting information on victory gardens. So if we were to rewind back to the 1920s, there was a lot happening. We were just finishing the First World War, and there was a lot of food insecurity. And so the government encouraged residents to grow their own vegetables. They were doing this throughout the war as well, and it was also popular for the Second World War and through the Depression era. So if you were to walk down into Erchless or that area in the 1920s, you would see a lot of manicured gardens in the front, and in the back would be these utility gardens or utility spaces where they would have gardens for the kitchen, vegetables, sort of medicine gardens as well, and herbs. And so personally, I just wanted to see this, and I thought we could pay homage to the 20s and we can try and incorporate all of this food and grow it right here in our annual beds. I planted edibles in the gardens at Erchless Museum because I wanted to teach myself how to grow vegetables. I wanted to see them in amongst the annuals. I wanted to create more of a living ecosystem. I believe the edibles that look best in a perennial setting are typically ones that have a vibrant color, texture, and things that you will use and eat for yourself. For example, in the Erchless Gardens, I planted a lot of kale, onions, corn, potatoes, tomatoes, vegetables that I love, but also vegetables that I knew I could share with the community. Each of them looked wonderful. I made sure they were grown in the conditions that they were suited for best, that being sun and shade. Most vegetables are going to want sun, a lot of sun, and also good drainage, a healthy soil, which means a very good compost level or compost quantity, and lots of water. And they also like to be harvested. If you're going to grow vegetables in your garden, make sure it's something that you use and that you eat, or something that you can give freely to your neighbors, or community programs such as Halton Food, because the plants themselves love to be picked. The more you harvest them, the more they will produce vegetable and produce herbs for you. The best vegetables to grow with your perennials are ones that are suited to the growing conditions of that perennial. For example, if you were growing a tomato plant, you're going to want to make sure he's in full sun, in a very well drained soil with a good compost, and able to be watered very well throughout the summer. So you want to make sure that his neighbor is a perennial that is also suited to those conditions, or is well enough away that he won't be influenced too much by all the water and the rich humus soil and the full sun exposure. Make sure they have enough room and space to grow next to their friends. But other than that, it's just a design preference. For example, I like to plant, I like to play around with texture, with scent. Things like rosemary and lavender have a very rich fragrance. And I also like to play with color. So the fruit, sometimes there's a flower, as in squash, they're going to be flowering, and then the fruit will come after the flowers, and those fruit are usually colored like tomatoes or eggplants or peppers. And so those colors can give a lot to a garden space. And those are all wonderful things you'd like to keep in mind when you're planting your vegetables in your perennial bed. So if you happen to have any extra produce next summer, please contact Halton Food and their Grow and Donate program. Thank you everyone for sharing your time with us. A big thank you to Carolyn Cross and the museum for lending us their baskets, and a happy Halton Garden Week.